Hi, Cora Stack here again, Dr. Stack. I wanted just to bring a few thoughts there together that I've been thinking about over the past while. And the title of this video is The Irish Constitution Explained, a Mathematician's Perspective on Democracy, Power and System Drift. So it's just a couple of thoughts there that I thought I'd, for educational reasons. I think, it's unfortunate that we aren't really introduced or educated about our constitution much earlier. I mean, I've only come across or started learning the constitution, as the need arose relatively recently, and it's stuff that I could have easily have learned in secondary school. It's not rocket science. So you could have learned it at an appropriate level. So are we as citizens becoming increasingly shaped, perhaps even constrained by the very democratic systems designed to protect us? Now, this is a question that would a lot of people in constitutional democracies are currently asking. This is not a conspiracy theory, it's a constitutional question. And from a mathematician's perspective, it's also a question about systems, how they're designed, how they behave, and what happens when they begin to drift from their original structure. And there is a lot of questions about this in America as well and in other constitutional democracies. Because, for example, in mathematics, the system can appear perfectly intact, while in reality it has stopped functioning. In mathematics, we distinguish between form, what something looks like on paper, and function, what it actually does in practice. The system can satisfy every formal rule and still fail in substance. So, and this is precisely the question now arising within Irish constitutional law. A recent case before the Supreme Court, Bunreacht versus Taoiseach and others, has brought this into sharp focus, and my own case has a related question. It involves the office of the Taoiseach, Simon Harris. But this case is not really about one individual. It raises a deeper question. Can coordinated political action render a constitutional mechanism ineffective in practice without ever formally breaching the Constitution? So the system, let's try and look at it. This is how I'm viewing it now, trying to understand it as I go along and get a deeper understanding of the hierarchy of the Constitution. And this is something I think that's, there's an analogy with mathematics maybe that I'll draw upon later on that might make some sense. So under Bunreacht and hÉireann, there's a clear hierarchy. Sovereignty resides in the people. Power is exercised through constitutional institutions, and political actors operate within that structure. In mathematical terms, this is a constrained system. The rules are not optional, they define the system itself. Now consider Article 12, the process for nominating candidates for president. There are two pathways, as I've said many times: nomination by the Oireachtas, 20 signatures are required, or nomination by at least 4 local authorities. This is not accidental. It is a designed redundancy as a safeguard against centralisation or the monopoly of one route, in particular, the Oireachtas route. So in system design, we would call this a distributed input mechanism. It ensures that access to the system cannot be controlled by a single point, particularly by the executive. So it's all really about the pluralism, which is inherent in the Irish Constitution. And again, the people are the masters. But in 2025, only 3 out of 31 local authorities made nominations. No candidate emerged through that route, and there were credible reports of coordinated political messaging. I mean, that's... Now, let's be clear, coordination is not unlawful, but the constitutional question is not about legality, it's about system behaviour. Here is the key question. If a constitutional mechanism exists but cannot operate independently in practice, is it still functioning, or has it become a formal structure without real effect? So let's look at the mathematical analogy we all know about BODMAS. Let us, from a mathematical point of view, we follow something called the order of operations, often remembered as BODMAS, brackets, order, division, multiplications, addition and subtraction. The principle is simple. Not all operations are equal. Some must be performed before others. So if I take a simple example, 2 plus 4 multiplied by 2 plus 3 multiplied by 4, if you ignore order, you might calculate it as 2 plus 3, which this would be do the addition first, and then multiply by 4 and get 20. But that's incorrect without brackets, because multiplication takes precedent, comes first. So it's 2 multiplied by, in brackets, 3 by 4, which is 14. Same numbers, same expression, completely different result, because the structure only works when the order is respected. It's only correct when the order is respected. Now think about the Constitution the same way. The Constitution is not just a set of rules, it's an order of operations for a democracy. This is the mathematician coming out of me now. This is where I'm getting this. So if we make this statement that the Constitution is not just a set of rules, it's an order of operations for democracy. So it tells us what comes first, what constrains what, and how power is supposed to flow. The people come first. The people are the masters. Then the Constitution, then institutions, and then political actors. The people come first, then the Constitution, then institutions, then political actors, in that order. But if that order is altered in practice, even subtly, the system may still appear intact, but the outcome changes. It's like going from the 20 to the 14, using the wrong operations and the wrong order of precedence. So I see it like this now. This is my latest insight. And this is exactly the issue we're now facing. So the Irish Supreme Court has already addressed this principle in McKenna versus An Taoiseach and Crotty versus An Taoiseach. The principle is clear. Constitutional processes must operate in substance, not merely in form. So from a mathematical perspective, a system that satisfies its equations but produces no output is not functioning. Local authorities are not minor participants. Under the Constitution, they act as independent gatekeepers to the ballot. They are meant to access independent judgment. They are constitutional actors in the presidential nomination process. But they're all absorbed into political strategy, then the system is no longer distributed. So if their role is absorbed, or if the political actor is substituted for the constitutional actor, if we like, then the order has been incorrectly distributed. It's become centralized. This is a precise way to frame this. A constitutional mechanism may be unlawfully frustrated where a function is assigned, independence is required, external coordination leads to systemic non-use. This is the instruction by Mr. Harris or the Fine Gael leadership, and the outcome reflects structural control. In mathematics, this is equivalent to a system whose inputs are no longer independent, and once independence is lost, the system's behaviour changes fundamentally. Now, the broader risk, if we take a step back, this is not about one election, it's about system drift. Across modern democracy, we're seeing increased coordination, greater centralization, reduced independent functioning of institutions. This is not necessarily intentional, but it's structural, and structural changes accumulate over time. So what happens if the court says this is just purely politics? Then a new rule emerges. A constitution mechanism may be rendered ineffective in practice without legal consequences. And surely that is the implications, because it becomes repeatable without consequence. It gradually weakens key constitutional provisions without consequence, allegedly. It may blur the boundary between law and politics. In systems terms, the constraints are still written but no longer enforced. So the Constitution provides a clear method for change, a referendum, but here change will occur differentially, not through law, but through practice. The structure remains, but its operation evolves quietly, incrementally. This brings us back to the original question: where is the line between governance and overreach? Some have compared these dynamics to forms of control, where power becomes concentrated, transparency is reduced, and independent action becomes harder. Whether or not one's agreed with that comparison, the concern behind it is real. Democracy is not just about voting. It is about accountability. It is about transparency and the real functioning of constitution safeguards. Constitutions are not symbolic documents. They are active systems of constraint. And like any system, they must function, not just exist. Because if constitutional mechanisms can be quietly neutralized in practice, then the question is no longer abstract. It becomes a question about all of us, and it is a question we cannot afford to ignore. So there are just a couple of points there in terms of the order in the Constitution as I see it. Now, this is just a mathematician's perspective, but just looking at it, I think this order, it's like as I say, that the order of precedence with respect to mathematical operations. So I think, if somebody kind of wants to understand how the Constitution operates, the people come first. So then the Constitution, then institutions, then political actors, and in the since the presidential nomination is a constitutional function, a political actor should, according to the order in which the Constitution is designed, they should put the constitutional role ahead of their